Okay, last week we spoke about ideas and how ideas translate into power in the realm of the political. We spoke about what it means to be political and what it means to recognize yourself, an individual within the sphere of political creatures, where you have to deal with things that inherently mean you have to confront and conflict with ideas of other people. That's what it means to participate in politics. The participation in politics is about the transference or the confrontation between ideas. Now, there are many different ways that ideas interact, and we'll talk about it as we go along, but what's really important to understand about how ideas interact is that they want to spread. Even the simplest idea, once it enters the cloud of ideas that's out there, and you guys will find out about that in a moment, the cloud of ideas that it spreads to automatically means I want to go out. No idea wants to stay super, super small. Even the simplest idea from inside your body about what you want to do, I want to raise up a glass, I want to talk to somebody. That simple idea requires expression. You actually have to take action to make it materialize and realize it in the world around you. Now, when we start talking about politics in the form of the state, it changes a little bit because it very rarely involves one person's ideas, even in a totalitarian regime. Even in a totalitarian regime, you are not talking about one person's ideas. You're talking about ideas that are communal, societal, cultural, take your pick, but it's on a much greater level than one individual. Even when the President of the United States or the President of Italy or Prime Minister of Russia decides that he's going to say something, he speaks with the power of those he represents. Does he represent everyone in his state? No, clearly not. Not everybody voted for him. But for the time being, he speaks for the state. Okay? And in speaking for the state, he also has the ability to take the ideas that he is espousing, whatever they may be, and provided he doesn't find conflict in the sphere of the political, use the energy, resources, time that he has available to translate those ideas, to materialize those ideas and make them real. Whether it's real institutions, whether it's real material gains, military, economic, etc. But if he doesn't do that, if he has an idea that he doesn't share, doesn't tell somebody, hey, let's make this a reality, then what's going to happen to it? Clearly, the idea can't manifest itself. The same is true for each of us. In the sphere of the political, when we talk about being part of a state, I'm Israeli, I'm American, I'm Italian, I'm French, it doesn't matter what. You are identifying yourself with a group, and that group makes you something. It means that you espouse and you accept some of the core ideas that that group espouses and believes in. Okay? So when we talk about the idea of, hold on, my thing is not working. When we talk about the idea of a state, we're essentially talking about a structure. We are not talking about something that is absolutely unitary. While when we talk about international relations, we might talk about the state as a unitary actor. It acts on its own as a unit. It is not a unitary actor inherently when you look at it inside. It can't be. Think about it. No state is made up of one person. It doesn't exist. Right? So if the state is a structure, then it has to have a hierarchy, not just of people, but of ideas. It has to have some sort of hierarchy that says, this is what's important to us as a group. If there's something which is important to us as a group, then we are willing to put energy towards the manifestation of those ideas in reality. What does that mean? We see institutions form. We see functional structures, not some great blob of people who say, oh, we believe the same thing, but actual formal de jure structures, structures that legally exist. Do you also have de facto structures? Yes, structures which exist in fact but aren't legal in the sense that they have not been found manifestation in the realm of legality. Does that make them illegal? No. Remember the knitting club? The knitting club is a structure. It probably has somebody who leads it, right? Now, we all know knitting clubs are not inherently political, but they can be, and we spoke about it. What happens when they get together and they start talking politics? It, for a moment or two, plays within the realm of political, because there are people there who are representing them, okay? And the structures are the same as us. The structures that we see, you could do a one-to-one between a human being and the structure, because a human being has all of the same resources that a state does. What do we need? We need energy, fuel. Where do we get it? Food, right? And water. We need to find a place to put our waste. Guess what? States do that all the time, right? What else do we need? We need resources to be able to do things, right? What do we need? We need, all of you are students. You either have computers or pens and paper. Why? Because you need those resources in order to manifest your goals of being good students. Those of you who aren't writing are clearly not as good students. Okay, maybe not. But my point is nonetheless the same. A state, in order to do things, needs material resources. It needs people who are willing to put their time and energy to make them happen. They have to accept what is being said as the core ideas of the state and want to work for the manifestation of those core ideas. Now, ideas conflict and clash. Why? Because every single idea that's out there wants to be the most powerful idea. Why would it want to be the most powerful idea? What does it gain by being the most powerful idea? Anyone? Yeah.
Legitimacy.
Not just legitimacy. What else might it gain?
Power.
It gains power, influence. What else can it do? If it is the powerful idea, what is it able to do in terms of manifestation?
Take control.
It's able to use the fact that it's the most powerful idea to control how the resources are being used. Because people who accept that idea and espouse to that idea, what do? What are they trying to do? Have the idea manifest itself. So if it becomes the most powerful idea and it spreads far enough among enough people, and enough people want it to happen, what is likely to happen?
It will happen.
Likely. It might not, but it's likely to happen, right? And as it gets more powerful and more powerful and more powerful, as it spreads, the likelihood of it happening gets much higher.
I think
Yeah.
I think it's more likely in a democracy for there to be change from a lot of political support than in a in like a monarchy or because I mean like people elect politicians into office based off of what they're going to do.
You're right, but that's you're saying you're looking at it from a very democratic perspective. Let's look at what happened in Egypt for a second. What happened in Egypt? It was not a democracy, right? But people expressed something. They were willing to do what? What were people willing to give in order to get democracy in Egypt? Their lives. How valuable is that? Well, depending on the person, depends on who you ask. But when you get down to it, the moment someone is willing to give absolutely of themselves, all of their time, all of their energy, any possible future that they may have as a person, to attain a political goal, that has to say something about the nature of that goal, both as an internal idea, but also as an external idea, an idea that they ascribe to and are willing to participate in. Excuse me, I'm very sorry. That was...
Is that Fiona?
No, it's not Fiona, but that's cute. Sorry about that. Okay, now at present, the state is the predominant formal structure that exists. Now, it's not an absolute. If we talk international relations, people will tell you it's not states necessarily. Anyone who's a realist will tell you that states are the unitary actor in the political, okay? But people who are institutionalists might say, no, I don't think that. I actually think that the institutions are actors within the political on the realm of the international. But when we're talking about politics in general, states are the most powerful formal actor that exists. States espouse specific ideas, not ideologies. They have ideas, core ideas, when we look at them. things that make them unique within the realm of states, okay? And they are binding. They're the only group they're the highest grouping which says, if you are a citizen of my state, there are rules that absolutely apply to you. Absolutely apply to you. The EU doesn't have those kinds of rules across the board because each state has rules of its own. Hold on. Russia doesn't have those either because of the same thing, certain parts of Russia. The United States has it, but it has the same problem when you look at the smaller states. There's conflict going on there right now between the state and the country, right? Over things like marijuana, right? Legalization of marijuana. Now, when there are structures that are created, what happens? Let's see if we can get this thing to work. Those structures both push inward. Oh, sorry, David. Yeah. Oh, what happened?
What is the polity?
Polity is hold on. One sec. Stay. Is it there? Okay, good. A polity is a political grouping. It's a group of what?
I thought that was a typo for policy.
No, polity. Okay? Now, what happens is following. Let's imagine just for a second that the structure that we're looking at is a state. This ball up here, this circle, okay? The circle is a state, okay? When you look at it, you notice that there are actually substructures to it. There are different groups that exist within it. Each of those groups wants to expand its power. The executive branch is a substructure of a state. The legislative branch is a substructure of a state. The judicial branch is a substructure of a state. The military is a substructure of a state. That is where politics takes place. Each one of those has its own rules that it has to abide by. Each one of those tries to expand its power outward while being forced. Why am I doing this? I'm having a really bad day. Can you guys tell? Forget the mouse. While being forced, right? Each one of them tries to spread outwards, while at the same time being forced inward by the structure itself, the overall structure. Why? Because the overall structure has limits to it. Does the United States expand out beyond its borders? It tries to, right? That's international relations. But internally, does the executive branch try and take more power away from the legislative branch on a regular basis? Absolutely. Does the legislative branch try and balance against the executive branch but also expand its own power? Absolutely. And they have agents who participate and do that regularly. The people who represent them, the structures, these substructures within the system. And what do? Their job is to try and get other people who are outside of the substructure to agree and accept the changes that are being made. Right? Think about it. If the legislature passes something in a democracy, don't they also have to convince the president or the executive branch that it's a good idea?
It depends.
In a democracy, unless it came from the executive branch, they have to at least get the executive branch to agree with it. Otherwise, what will happen? The executive branch will simply say no, if they have that capability. David, you had something you wanted to say? Before? No, that's it? Okay.
So the two-thirds majority.
It depends, yes. And that's already showing the expression of power as it exists in the balance of status quo. What are we talking about? Right now, if we were to take a snapshot of any state, we would find that there's some sort of status quo that exists. There's some sort of, this is where we're at, right? But where we're at right now changes 10 minutes from now. It could change a year from now. It has changed many times. In every state, there is progress made on the political field that includes changes. And those changes are important. So imagine for a second how many different substructures you could find in a state. I put a few up here, and I do mean a few. Okay? There are so many structures that exist within a state. And each of them is its own sphere of influence. Each of these substructures has its own sphere of influence. Yeah?
What's institution?
Well, institutional in this case would be things like government as an institution, not as the politics side of it, but rather the formal institutionalized side of government. Those also have structures to them, and those structures are really important, and they are their own sphere. There are people who go out of their way because they are part of the institution, but they don't actually participate in politics to make sure that the institution has power. Okay, and it happens all the time. There are people who are part of groups. Let's use the university as an example. In the university, you can find any number of substructures, right? Each of those substructures represents something. The dean's office, the student union, the religious offices, all the different offices we have, right? And what happens between them? They argue, they bicker, they try and figure things out. And when they get down to it, when they come down to the bottom level of it, they also try really hard to maintain or raise the power of the institution that they represent. The dean's office wants to be powerful, right? Because they want to have that ability. The faculty, the senior faculty, the junior faculty, all want to have power because that power gives them the ability to either make change or maintain the status quo. Same is true in any state. The legislature, while wanting to maintain its present level of power, will try and do what? Expand its power as much as it possibly can. Okay? In the field of economics, you will find that economics tries to overtake, as a structure, tries to overtake politics. Politics, when it starts discussing economics as its core issues, is essentially a sphere that has been overpowered by the sphere of economics. It has been almost completely absorbed by it. Does it stay that way? No. That would be a plutocracy. I mean, think about it. If this sphere of economics absolutely takes over the sphere of the political, what happens? The people who are the most powerful in the sphere of economics will then become the leaders. And then what happens? It essentially will change into a plutocracy. Make sense? Doesn't have to happen that way. It can happen any number of other ways. But that is something that can happen. Yeah?
So basically, every government or every state is controlled by some structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you determine which structure it's controlled by?
Well, that's part of what we do as political scientists, is to examine a state and try and figure out what are the structures that are most powerful within the state. For instance, when we examine a state that we want to say is a totalitarian state, what are we likely to find in terms of the structure of the state? Which sphere is going to be the most powerful, do you think?
Okay.
It might be the military, right? Might. Military is almost definitely going to be one of the most powerful ones in a totalitarian regime. Another one might be the security forces, the internal security, right? But just as important in a totalitarian regime, politics is going to get involved in everything. The sphere of the political would also be seen in the religion, would also be seen in ethnic questions that arise. Politics would be part of the medical staff. One of the things they found is that in some totalitarian regimes, doctors are not nearly as good as doctors in other regimes. Why? How do people get accepted to be a doctor? Do you have to be a party member, or do you have to be a really good student? First and foremost, you have to be a party member. You have to be part of the group. You have to be part of the leading group. You have to have some sort of association with them. Otherwise, why would they send you to go be a doctor? Now, yes, they might also say you have to have really good grades. But you're automatically eliminating anybody who's not participating in the majority structure, the social structure that is predominant within the state. Totalitarian regimes are known to do that. Are all totalitarian regimes going to do that? No. Do some? Yes. Once again, politics, there's no absolute here. I can't tell you absolutely, oh my goodness, all totalitarian regimes are going to be like this. Because no two states are ever alike. Ever. You can never find two states where you're going to say this structure and that structure and all of the substructures are exactly the same. It is just not possible. Why not? Somebody else. Why not? Somebody else is going to start talking or I'm going to start picking people. Yeah.
Each leaders from separate states will have different ideas.
Is it just the leaders?
Party?
Not just the parties either. Who else? If you have leaders, what else do you have? You have to have something else if you've got leaders. Followers, right? Think about how important followers are in a state. The leader is one person generally, maybe a group, right? Small group generally. Is that enough? Is it enough to just have them being the agents, them being the ones who are going out and saying, hey guys, we should really be doing this thing? Is that enough? No. What do you need? You have to have people who are willing to go and do the thing, whatever it is. If nobody is willing to actually do it except the leaders, what happens? Nothing. Unless the leaders are powerful enough to be able to convince you to do it otherwise. Now here's where we get into the question of what does it mean to be a follower or an agent within a structure, okay? Now, are leaders agents? Yes, the President of the United States is the predominant agent of the United States. When he speaks with the full force of the United States behind him, whether everyone agrees with him or not. But guess what? When I open my mouth, if I'm American and I'm talking to people who are not American and we're talking politics, I represent the United States of America. Just like you represent Italy, you represent France, I'm not sure what you represent, and you represent Vietnam. Okay? Why? Because people see you that way. They associate you with what you associate yourself with. If all you say is I'm Israeli, first of all, if you have any kind of accent that's not Israeli, what are they going to say? What else are you? They're going to ask you to associate yourself as an agent for other things because they recognize that you're not just Israeli. Right? How many of you act as agents? Think about it for a second. How many of you act as agents? All of you should be raising your hands, right? Whether you want to or not. Why do you all act as agents whether you want to or not? Think about this for a second. What has happened to you in your lifetimes that has led you to be an agent?
When we're raised, like, you know, in our homes, we have core values that are like instilled in us literally from the time that we're born, and like because of our social structure and because of how
Very
we
good.
socialize with the world, we enact those things which are our core values just because we can't help it, we don't know any other way.
Very good. What happens is called political socialization. Excellent. What does it really matter? Does it really matter, or like when it happens or how it happens? Yes, it does. Could you imagine someone who's raised in a room? They have no windows. All they have is white walls. They hear no music. They get their tray of food, which is very bland and very simple, and there's nothing to it at all. It doesn't have anything to it. It's not spicy. It's not interesting. It's the most dull thing you could ever imagine. Have they been socialized? They've been socialized to a white room. Could you imagine if you take that person outside that room and then put them in the middle of a field where there's grass and a blue sky and white clouds and trees and birds chirping? This person is not used to hearing any of these things. First of all, I think the person would go crazy because they'd be overwhelmed. But more importantly, they haven't been socialized. They have no clue what those things are. Socialization also happens to us every minute of the day. Every minute of the day we get socialized. What do we get socialized to? To a way of life. Certain values, certain norms, cultural norms, ethnic norms, religious values. Okay? And most of the time, we don't even recognize that that's what's actually happening to us. Why not? Because we're kids. We don't recognize that when our parents tell us to do something, they are essentially teaching us how to behave, how to act in a certain atmosphere, in a certain environment. For instance, when we go to a museum, right? And you're a little kid, and you see all those really cool statues and all the other stuff. What do you want to do? Touch everything, right? I want to touch it, I want to play with it, it looks cool, it's colorful, it's all these other wonderful things. And what do your parents tell you? Don't touch, right? Keep your hands to yourself. Whisper. Why? They are socializing you to an atmosphere and a place. Okay? Now, part of the question that arises from this is, what are the stimuli that lead to political action? What is it that can cause somebody to play in the sphere of the political, in a state? Okay? And what does it mean when someone says, I have red lines? Do those red lines actually exist? Do they influence our decisions? Are they absolute or are they subject to change? Think about it for a minute. You get taught something for the first 12, 13 years of your life. And suddenly you go to a different school and things that weren't allowed suddenly are allowed. Are you going to change your way you act? Change the way you act? Yeah. But you already were told you're not allowed to act that way. So what's happening? You've already been socialized. What, you're getting re-socialized? Yeah, you are. You are actually going through a process called secondary socialization. There are different forms of socialization out there, okay? There's primary socialization, okay? That starts at infancy. You learn about things like how do you treat another person? And if anyone thinks that's not politics, it is. Why? Because it also has to do with things like race. Think about it. Until the 1700s, until the mid-1800s, blacks, were they considered equals to whites? In most of Europe, in most of the United States, no. Why not? Because people were socialized, they were brought up to believe that there was an inequality between blacks and whites. It's a process of socialization. It's something you teach, okay? It's about attitude. It's about the values we hold dear. Now here's the thing. When you're a kid, the values you get socialized to get ingrained very, very deeply. It's very hard to completely remove values that you've had your entire life at some later date. When your parents raise you to believe something about other people, about certain core ideas, like what is right and what is good, they are essentially teaching you how they expect you to behave and see the world for the rest of your lives. The likelihood that you will see it the same way they do absolutely is zero. The likelihood that you will continue and hold with you, and even hold dear to you for the rest of your lives, some of those ideas is an absolute yes. The likelihood that you will completely disregard everything your parents taught you from nothing until you left their house is highly unlikely. Especially about politics. Now, what might happen? You may have been raised in one political setting and then decide that that political setting is not right for you. You may change that political setting entirely. How many of you have decided to move to Israel, to live here? You've made a huge change. Think about what you've done. You've made Aliyah. Think about what you've done. You've essentially removed yourself from the political setting in which you were raised and brought yourself into a setting that you were not socialized to through your primary socialization. You have to learn how to do something that Israelis are brought up doing, being political in the structure of Israel. Right? And if you didn't come to Israel, Then you don't have to do that. You get to learn, you've learned how to do it, hopefully, in your home state. Now here's the question. Is it only your parents that help teach you the socialization process?
No.
Absolutely not. How many of you had mock elections in school or student union elections in school when you were younger and had a student body who had representatives? Was there a democratic elections? Yeah? Why? Why were there elections?
Because that's how our government is.
Because that's how the government is. What are they essentially trying to teach you?
That the school is a microcosm of what's going on outside, and they're like kind of socializing you to behave outside of school.
Exactly. They're socializing you to learn how you might need to behave outside of school. Now, do you always have to worry about voting? No. But a big part of participatory government is voting. How many people spend a lot of their time voting? Very few. How many people spend a lot of their time not caring about politics on a day-to-day basis? Quite a few. But those same people, a lot of them will still go and vote. Why? Because they've been taught that voting is important. Have you ever heard someone say, I don't go and vote because my vote really doesn't matter? Right? Someone in this room has said it before. You live in New York. Think about it. When that happens, what are they essentially saying? I don't believe what I've been socialized to. I don't believe what I've been taught, that my vote matters. Why would someone say that? What process might lead someone to believe that the core ideas of the state, including democracy, for instance, are not applicable?
Because they see that with their vote, nothing changes.
Very good. They see that despite the fact that they do choose to participate in the vote, they don't see an outcome which represents what they believe is necessary, right? And if you see that happen again and again and again and again and again, what happens? You become disillusioned with the system, with the structure as it exists. What are you likely to do at that point? What are you likely to do at that point? You might want to deny the structure, right? You might say, I'm not part of this structure anymore. What else?
Might go against it.
You might go against it. You might try and fix it, right? You might try and fix it, okay? Now, the secondary process is a process of learning that's appropriate to a specific grouping, right? It's not just in general the culture and the society and politics writ large, but it's a particular group that you start associating with. Because now it's about choice. Your secondary process is much more about the choices you make as an individual than about what your parents want for you. Now, is that always true? No, because they may choose what high school you go to, therefore keeping you within that bubble for a while. But eventually, what happens? We all grow up. And when we grow up, we have to make choices. And those choices are important because they impact not just us as individuals, but the state at large. Think about it. If a lot of people were not to participate in politics, just didn't go. Can you imagine if like 80% of the population just didn't go and vote? Regularly. 90, just didn't go and vote. What does that say about the structure? There's something a little bit weird about it. There's something wrong, right? Now, once you've gone through that secondary socialization process, can you choose to change? Absolutely. Do you have to re-socialize yourself? Yes, you do. Not only do you have to re-socialize yourself, but you have to decide how you are going to be an agent for the new structures that you are deciding to take part in. How many of you like everything there is to like about your home country or about this country? Everything. That's what I thought. How many of you disliked everything there is to dislike about your previous country and this country?
Previous or this?
Both.
Different answers.
Okay. I don't expect any of you to answer yes to either of them. Do I expect you to maybe say there are things wrong with that one or there are things wrong with this one? Yes. And do I expect you to decide what time and energy you're going to put towards maybe making change? Yeah. Why? Because there's no freaking way you can change everything. Can you make an absolute change? You, one individual.
Yeah.
Absolute change?
Yes. By building the nation. Everything else will just go.
Okay.
If you start making the change, you can affect others.
Very good. If you start making the change, you have the potential to make your idea spread. And if your idea spreads, a structure will form. Are you going to be the leader of that structure? Maybe. Do you have to be the leader of that structure? No. The structure itself will form. Some people will take leadership roles. Some people will be yes men. They'll sit there and be like, yeah. And when you actually ask them to do anything, oh, I'm sorry, I have to go do something else. Then some of them will be like, yeah, okay, I'm here, I don't really care, whatever. But if you ask them to do something, they'll actually do it. And then you get people who are so involved, but they don't want to be the leaders. They want to be what's called exemplary followers. They have so adapted themselves and socialized themselves to this new idea that they are willing, despite the fact that they're not leaders, to spend huge amounts of time, energy, resources to the manifestation of this new idea within the sphere of the political. Okay? Now, in any state, you can find both positive and negative forms of socialization. In any state. Because in any state, you're finding different structures, and those structures, some of them have or use positive reinforcement, and some of them inherently use negative reinforcement. Some states lean towards one more, others lean towards the other. Does that make sense so far? Am I losing anybody? Good. Okay? When you use positive socialization, you try and teach values, right? You talk about norms. This is the way we act. This is what it means to be American, Israeli, Russian, French, German, I don't care. All of them. It's not this is what it means to be a human being, right? Because what it means to be a human being is already a philosophical debate. This is a national question. It's a question of nationality. How do you identify yourself as whatever it is you associate with? Now, the state, as it works through this process of socializing you, does so because it needs you. A state without followers is a pretty weak state. It needs people to believe in the state. You have to believe in the state. Could you imagine if nobody believed in the state? In any state. What would we have? Come on, guys. What would if there was no states? You'd either have anarchy or communism. You get one of two choices. You get anarchy on one side, where nobody likes anybody and we all hate each other and we all try and fight and we might make small groups but forget it. And what's on the other side? Communism. We all get along, we're all hunky-dory, everything's good, right? You don't need a state, but everything's fine because, now, does it mean that anarchists won't necessarily be everything's good and happy? Yeah. So you need the state. It has to teach values, norms, and habits that are associated with it. How do we learn them? Among other things, what do we learn? We learn what is legal and what is illegal, right? Those are very clear, defined norms because they are not just norms that are based on the social structure. They're not just social, but they have been formalized through a process of legislation. And that formalization is very important, right? The other thing that we sometimes see in a positive socialization setting is the attempt to maximize individual liberty. When the state tries to socialize you, they attempt, if they're trying to do it positively, they are attempting to also socialize you to do the most that you can do for the state, without them having to ask you. They want you to choose to do for the state. In Israel, you have to go in the army. You have to go in the army, right? It's a law, which is right now up for debate, and there's a whole bunch of issues with it, but in general, you have to go into the army. I'm not going to get into it right now. We'll get into it in a minute. right? Do you have to go into the army in the United States? Does anyone know?
No.
No. Do you have to go into the army in France?
Yeah,
Have to.
one day.
One day. Okay. Italy?
No.
No. Denmark?
Very briefly, like 3 months, guys, only a small percentage.
Okay. So if you notice, each state has its own sort of thing. This one says a little bit, but you have to go in. The United States says, no, you don't. What is the United States basically doing? How is it socializing? It's socializing to individual liberty. What's it saying? If you want to go in, go for it. Now, there are other states that say, you know what? I can't give you that much individual liberty. We don't have the resources at our disposal to do that. So I'm requiring you to go in for a day or for 3 months, just so you get the basic socialization process of this new structure that you now have to participate in. Have to participate in. Why? Because you are a citizen of the state. And that process teaches you, and it influences you, and it will impact you for the rest of your life. Even if you never spend another day in the army. Look at Israelis. Israelis are really good. The army is so important that even 10, 20, 30 years after someone has gotten out of, their original 3-year stint in the army, what happens? It's still important to them. They still hang out with the friends who they had in the army. They still do the process of miluim, most of them. It's important to them to see those guys. They care about it. A lot of them want to do miluim because they believe that it's important. They believe it's important. Do all of them want to do miluim? Do all of them want to do reserve duty? No. Why not? Because some of them, after they've finished, have said, you know what? I don't like this structure. This structure is not good for me. It doesn't work for me. They don't like what the structure espouses. And I'm talking now not about the state, but which substructure? What substructure am I talking about? The military, right? The army. It's its own structure. It has its own rules. It has its own norms and values. And in fact, the military uses what form of socialization? Does it use positive socialization? Probably not, right? Once you go into the army, it's going to use negative socialization. It's not going to exploit the political, but it's going to indoctrinate you to the interests of the ruling group, right? Who's the ruling group in the military? The head officers, right? And the politicians above them. What are they going to teach you? That you have to fulfill your missions as given to you by whom? Your officers. Are you allowed to do whatever you want? No. But when you get out of the army, what do you say? I'm going to go to India for a year, right? Why? Because suddenly this whole structure has changed. You're no longer part of it. Will it influence you for the rest of your life? Absolutely. But is it part of you now, every moment of your day? No. But it will always influence you. Okay? And when people come out of the army, what happens? Some of them are thrilled and good, and it's, wow, that was such an amazing experience. And some of them never ever want to see a uniform again. Why? Because it's not just about the structure. It's about what the structure does. How the soldiers are asked to act as agents for the structure. Whether they continue to believe what the structure believes. I want you to visualize it like a cloud. You gonna work? You're gonna work. Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I just want to have a question. If the government gives up their their power to socialize people, like you said, like they give them the choice, like they say, like they try to socialize people to make their own decisions. Aren't they basically giving up their power to socialize to other structures?
Essentially, yes, but they're doing it with the foreknowledge or with the hope that those structures are supportive of the state. So that the substructures of the state that you're talking about are supportive of the state. Is it an absolute? No. For instance, today in the United States, they're finding that a lot of colleges are much more liberal than the actual, in terms of structures, they're much more liberal than the average that you find in the United States. As a result, they're realizing that the students who are going there are being socialized to a liberal setting, which is pulling the whole country in one direction. Does that make the state happy? Not necessarily. There are people who think that it's very problematic. People who represent the state who think it's problematic. For instance, the ASA recently said, the ASA is the American Studies Association, recently said we are supporting the BDS movement, the movement to stop whatever it's called, the boycott movement, right? And who got involved? Everybody. It wasn't just the universities, and like 200 universities said, well, we're not going to support the ASA anymore. Who else got involved? Politicians, the legislature, the Congress of the United States sent out a thing saying, we don't agree with this, it's wrong. You don't boycott like this, it's not the prerogative of a organization to get involved with this. Wow. The state representatives, agents of the state, expressed a view regarding a substructure, an organization, and its decisions. What are they trying to do? You're socializing the wrong way. You are socializing against the norms and values that we as a country represent. Think about it. There is a group in the United States, I would say there are several, quite a few actually, who do not support Israel, don't like Israel, don't want Israel to exist, or just want Israel to do whatever they think is the right political move, right? Are those groups representative of the United States? No. Are they made up of Americans? Yeah. When the president speaks, does he speak for them? Not really, but he does. Why? Because essentially he is the United States. Right? Am I right? Yeah. Is the same thing true for other presidents and prime ministers? Yeah. When Bibi Netanyahu goes to visit somewhere, what is he doing? He's representing Israel. He's acting as the primary agent for the structure known as the State of Israel. Okay? And he speaks with the full force of Israel behind him. Now, what happens if he says something and 90% of the population doesn't agree with him?
Protests, rallies.
Do you think he would actually be able to do what he says? No, he doesn't.
No, he doesn't. Not if 90%.
Okay, now what I want you to do is imagine a cloud for a second. And within that cloud, what do you see? Lots of different spheres. And within each of those spheres, there's something really important. There's a lot of people. And those people don't have one idea. What do they have? Many ideas. And those ideas interact. And they pound off each other. And some of them disappear because they're just too weak to continue growing. And some of them take over other ideas. They literally come and they go, oh, I'm taking you and you're mine now. And some of them say, you know what? I don't really care about you. The cloud you're looking at could very easily be states. Each of those spheres could be a state in and of itself, with substructures and agents, etc., right? Or it could be the international world as we see it, the world as we see it, and international relations. Or maybe the cloud is just one structure, one idea. When we have an idea, what do? I say it to you. You decide if you're going to pass it on. But once I've said it, I've essentially released that idea into the cloud, right? Into this cloud of ideas that exists. If you don't accept my idea, what's going to happen to it? It's going to die right here, right now. If you accept the idea, though, suddenly a structure starts to form. And the idea starts to create a sphere of its own. Now, how many political opinions are there going to be about that sphere? Well, they'll be equal to the number of people who actually know the sphere exists. Because each person will have their own perspective on that idea. Right? You know what? Biology works a lot the same way. That is an algae cell. Yes, I said algae. It's actually an algae colony. It's called the volvox, V-O-L-V-O-X, for anyone who wants to actually write it down. What do you see? Basically one big cloud with a lot of little spheres inside of it, and inside each of those spheres, smaller spheres. Well, this manifests itself in us, all of our cells, but it also manifests itself in our ideas. When we ascribe to an idea and it grows and it grows and it grows, it essentially becomes so big that it's going to burst out of the cloud and become what? Real. Something is going to happen. And that something that happens, whether it's an action, whether it's a material something that happens in the form of politics, that something impacts every other sphere around it, every other structure. Why? We live in a world with limited resources. Which means if one sphere says, that is mine, and another sphere says, no, that is mine, two structures saying the same thing, and they're talking about that same resource, you think they're going to have an argument? They might. They might decide to just have fun and say, you know what, let's split it evenly. Is that likely? Not really. Why? Because each sphere wants to expand. Each state seeks to manifest itself beyond its borders. Now, does that mean that it wants to be an empire and, take over the world? Yes, that's exactly what it means. Okay, yes, that is exactly what it means. Are there states that don't want to spread anymore? No, they at least want to spread the ideas that they believe in. They may not want to create an empire in the sense of, oh, we rule all of this, but think about it from a different perspective. If enough people ascribe to the ideas of Denmark, and what Denmark puts out is its important ideas, and there are more people than the Denmark people who decide to do it. Everybody decides to. We're not just citizens of Denmark. What? Right? What happens? All of a sudden, Denmark becomes very powerful. Congratulations. Right? Or the Swiss with their chocolate. Could you imagine if the Swiss stopped making chocolate? How many people would protest? I know I would protest. Why? Because Swiss chocolate's very good. But the fact is that, could you imagine if Switzerland said, we are no longer doing this because of how the cocoa farmers are treated? Shh. My Swiss man in the background is laughing at me. In other words, it would never happen. But can you imagine just for a second, what would happen? First of all, the Swiss would be up in arms, right? But functionally, that idea would spread. If a state were to come out and say, we are no longer allowing the import of cocoa because of the way it is harvested and the way that people are treated for humanitarian reasons, how powerful has that idea become? Right now, how many states actually participate in the boycott of chocolate? Anyone? Chocolate boycott? None. Why? How powerful an idea is it? Not very. Right? Could it become more powerful? Sure. And if a state structure ascribes to it and uses its agents to help spread the idea even more, it will become even more powerful. Does it absolutely have to have a state in order to make the change? Do you have to influence the state in order to create this change? No, you don't. You don't have to have a state to create this kind of change. You don't need state support. You can do it independent of the structure of the state. But you will be doing it under the structure of the state, as a substructure. Which essentially means if you can get enough people to ascribe to the idea across the board, even though you're not legislating it, even though you're not creating laws about it, right? You are essentially creating a political movement which has so much power that the number of people who ascribe to it overpower the actual influence of the structure of the state. Has that ever happened? Has it ever happened? Think about it for a second. Can you guys imagine, think about anything. Any time where there has been a movement which was so powerful, it was able to essentially change or influence the nature of the state without having to go through the legislative process. Yeah. Germany before the Second World War.
Went through the government.
It was a vote. It was through votes. Hold on.
It went through the government.
Anyone?
The United States?
When?
When they were first established, like in the 1700s.
Sort of, yeah.
The human rights movement.
Human rights movements. Soviet Union. What do you mean the Soviet Union? You mean the disbanding of the Soviet Union. Okay. What else? Human rights movement's a good one. There's another one which we all participate in, and now it's starting to be legislated, but people have been doing it for years and years and years. What? No, not marijuana. Although that is, because it's a good one, but I'm thinking of another one from it. No. Think about it. We all, on some level, have been socialized to this. Most of you have been socialized it more than I have, because I'm 36, and you all are at least 5, 6. No. Think about it for a second. You go outside and you see someone throw something on the floor. What are you going to tell them?
Recycling?
Oh, recycling. Was recycling always something that you did because the government told you to? No. It started out as what? An idea. Somebody said it's not good for the world for us to be throwing away all this garbage. Did the governments do that? No. Who did it? A person. And he created what? A whole structure. And that structure has hundreds of different substructures, hundreds of different agents, and each of you have probably been socialized to that idea. How much have you been socialized? Well, let's ask. How many of you are using recycled paper? Well, how many of you are not using paper at all? In general, in your lives, trying to avoid using paper. Avoid using paper, including toilet paper and all the other kinds of paper that are out there. Okay, so obviously, if you avoid using paper completely, it's impossible. But you can make a choice about what kind of toilet paper you use. You can use recycled toilet paper, right? You can choose to use recycled paper when you're writing, right? You can make sure that you recycle paper. And when you do, even if you're not saying it to somebody, if somebody sees you putting the paper in the recycling bin or the plastic bottle in the recycling bin, what are you doing? You're socializing them. You're acting as an agent to a political idea. And anyone who tells you that the green green recycling movement is not politics, you should re-socialize them to the idea, because it's not true. Okay? These spheres start at the very smallest level from the cells, and they go all the way to the biggest levels that we've got in terms of the social structures that we create on our own. So what is political theory then? What is the job of the state and politics? Who decides? Right? And who defines the ideational basis of the state? And herein lies the crux of the issue. The conflict between the people and the structure. Why? Because as new people get born and go through their primary socialization and then go through a secondary socialization, what happens to them? Are they going to absolutely accept the structure? Maybe, if it's a specific kind of structure. If they are raised in a totalitarian regime, what is the likelihood that both their primary and secondary socialization will not be questioned for the rest of their lives? Pretty high. Why? Because they've been taught, right? They've been taught through politics and the socialization process of politics that you don't question the state. That the state is the absolute power. Let's take the other end of the spectrum. In a liberal democracy, who has the power? Hypothetically. Hypothetically, the people have the power, right? So if the people want to enact change in the system, in the structure itself, could they hypothetically do it?
Hypothetically, yes.
Would the structure itself want them to?
No.
Probably. Think about it. Remember, Remember what I said, the sphere itself, the institutionalization has its own sphere. If you want to change the structure, that means you also want to change the institutions, right? Either the way they function or the rules under which they function or how they choose to act based on the norms, values, etc., right? How open would a state be to that kind of change? It depends. It depends. There are structures in a state which are more open to change. There are structures in a state which are not so open to change. Let's take a look at the military for instance. How open is any military organization to change?
Not really.
Okay? Military of Italy. Can you be openly homosexual, gay, lesbian, transsexual, bisexual?
There's no law about it.
There's no law about it. No clue. France. Are you allowed to be homosexual in the military openly? But it's not a good idea. In the United States, up until recently, were you allowed to? Don't ask, don't tell happened after changes started to take place in the structure, right? In the rules of the structure. And since then has don't ask, don't tell has essentially gone out the door as well, right? Here in Israel, you can be openly gay, it doesn't matter. Does not matter. Nobody will say one way or the other. Okay? Right? Think about it. The structure has its own rules. I can take different militaries and on this political question, ask how it influences them, and we will find different answers. You will find different answers everywhere. Switzerland? What do you, military? Gay, not gay?
Can be gay, but it's actually you can get out of it if you say you're gay.
Right, because the military is essentially...
You like it and it causes a lot of problems.
Why? Because the military is also essentially Christian, right? There's a Christian influence in the military.
Also because you're living with.
More than in the United States, for instance.
I don't think it cares so much.
Well, it has to-
Yeah? Okay? Think about it.
You're sleeping with other.
So who defines the ideational basis of the state? The answer is, it changes regularly. It changes, but the ideational structure changes because of internal debate that's taking place between different ideas. Let's take a look at some examples. Let me throw some examples at you. Israel, when it was created in 1948, okay, we had David Ben-Gurion, who created the IDF, who said we're going to have one military force. And then we had Menachem Begin, who said, I have guys in Jerusalem, they're not part of your military force, they are military, I want to give them weapons. Those weapons are coming from France. Thank you, France, for sending the weapons. Okay? They arrive right near Haifa and are immediately surrounded by IDF soldiers and told what? You have to give over the weapons. Menachem Begin gets on the boat, takes the boat south, and rams it ashore in Tel Aviv. Okay? It then gets shot at, people die. What was going on?
Internal conflict.
It was an internal conflict between two ideas about what it meant to create the state of Israel and what had to take place for the state of Israel to maintain its borders or even expand its borders. Right? That conflict impacted the country for years to come. What was the primary structure in the country at the beginning? Does anyone know the name of the party? There was one party that it won every year after year after year after year after year. Mapai. The Mapai party. Who ran the Mapai party? David Ben-Gurion. Were there other people trying to fight against him? Yeah. Were there people who said, we don't like that idea? Yeah. Did they do it within the realm of the political? Yes. Once this state was formed, the conflict that took place was a political conflict. It didn't involve so much weaponry. It didn't involve weaponry so much. What did it involve? Politics, talking, getting your idea to be accepted. Yeah, Yona?
It wasn't only politics, it's just that one side decided to not fight back, so therefore it was politics.
That is politics.
They weren't using politics, they were using force.
And force is the continuation of politics by other
They were
means.
using military as a means of politics.
No, they were using the military as a resource for political ideas. It's a resource. The military is a substructure of the state. It is also a resource.
It was a state at that point.
It was 1948. We declared a state.
It was like the day it becomes a state, it's not. It was still deciding what exactly the state.
Exactly, and that debate that was taking place is exactly my point. That debate that was taking place over what was going on and the Altalena affair, what happened there, was essentially establishing the solidity of the IDF as the sole military force. That is what he was trying to do. Whether he did it nicely or not is not the question. The outcome was still the same. It was politics.
Wouldn't you say that according to like what we learned in the first semester about legitimacy and everything like that, after the 1948 like being done and everything like that?
After the War of Independence?
Yeah, well, that and being recognized on the international scale, but we still didn't have a set government, it seems.
Yeah, we did. In 1948, there was already a government.
What's going on with the military that we're still having problems with the military at that
What do you mean? At that point? Because we have a government, but the military at that point was divided into 3 different groups. The Haganah, the Lechi, and the Irgun, right? And they were led by people who believed different things. They had different ideas about what it meant to establish a state of Israel. Very different ideas. Okay? Once the establishment of the state of Israel took place, some of those people joined together and they said, you know what, we've got the state, great. And then there were people who said, no, we disagree with the way this is taking place, and therefore we want to maintain ourselves as a separate entity. Different structure. Now, can a state allow for that to happen?
Yes.
No. States cannot allow for more than one structure being the means of decision making or the means of use of force. Think about it. Could you imagine if the state had 12 different armies under different people who could each decide what they want to do with it? How functional would the state be?
How is there like a reporting system to that?
What do you mean?
Like, if you have 3 different militaries, who's coming back to the head and saying...
Exactly the problem. And so what they did is they created a combined unitary force. What was it called? The IDF, Tzahal. Right? It was called the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. Right? That force was created legally. Ben Gurion announced it. It then got approval of the VAD, which was the group of people who were, at that point, the provisional government of the state. And as a result, Ben Gurion decided that no other military force could exist. Now, is it always military? No. Like I said, the Green Movement is a wonderful movement. The gay, lesbian, transsexual, that's a movement. And it's a political movement. It doesn't need to use force. There are essentially 2 things you need to think of. There are structures who are going to support the status quo. There are internal structures that will support the status quo, the way things are now. And then there are structures that support what? Change. As long as the status quo structures have more resources and more energy to be able to put towards their ideas, what's going to happen?
It's going to change.
It's not going to change. If the balance changes and a group which is seeking some sort of change within the structure, whether it's policy change, a change in what we're doing, right? Or changes in how we're doing things, or changes in why we're doing things, right? There's 3 different ways we can change. Why we do things, how we do things, or what we do, right? If they are able to essentially change one of them, then that structure now becomes the status quo structure. That new ideational hierarchy is the status quo. And it's going to stay for a while. A long time? No. But it'll stay for a while. How long did it last in Egypt? Right now. Recently. How long did it last in Egypt? Think about it. What happened? Mubarak was in charge, right? Then what happened? He was kicked out. And then what happened? Why was he kicked out?
Obama gave
Didn't
a
consider the country as a democracy.
And they wanted a democracy. So what idea were they espousing? Democracy, right? Were they saying we want a democracy that's specifically like A, B, C, D, this kind? No, they were just saying democracy. It's an idea. Democracy is an idea. Let's make that very clear. Right? Did they get it? Did they? Did they have democracy for a couple of months? Yes or no? Yeah, they did. They had elections, people were voted in, and then what happened? Who overthrew the democratically elected leader of the military. Why? Because the military didn't like the change that had occurred in the state through a democratic process. And so what did they do? They overthrew the leader, Morsi, and took control. Are there people who don't like that in Egypt right now? Do you think there might be some people who don't like it? Now, here's the question. How was it that Mubarak got overthrown, but then Morsi got overthrown by the same people who originally supported Mubarak? Think about this. Think about what I just said. It was a rhetorical question. Think about this for a second. Think about what I'm saying. The military, which supposedly supported Mubarak, eventually supported the protesters, allowing for democracy to take place, then decided that despite the fact that their agents had supported that change, then came out and said, oh wait, we made a mistake. This change isn't good for us. And what did they do? They enacted change again. Why? Because the military happens to be a very powerful structure in Egypt. And there are very few limits to that structure in Egypt. Make sense? Yes.
I just wanted to say that, like, so when it comes to like voting, a lot of times when people vote, they don't necessarily vote for somebody, but they vote against something else.
That is very true. And when you vote against something else, you are still saying, I want to enact change. Or I want to maintain the status quo. I don't like this thing that's been going on. I don't like the way this person's been representing me, right? Or representing my structures.
Right.
And the structures that I associate with. Therefore, I want to make change. When Barack Obama was elected president, what was it? What did he say? Change. Why? What is it he wanted to change? There's a lot of questions about what he wanted to change. There are a lot of questions. Let's look at it in the most basic, simple level possible. And it's going to sound super racist. Had there ever been a black president prior to that?
No.
So what was one of the basic changes he made simply by being elected?
Became the first black president.
Being the first black president. He established a new, what?
Why is that racist?
I said it might be. Some people might consider.
Black doesn't make whatever.
I said people might take it that way. No, you know what's racist? What might be racist about it is if you look at it and say that's the only change he made.
Well, that's
And-
the only reason why he got elected.
Or that is one of the changes that occurred as a result of his being elected. Okay?
I think that's right.
Let's not get into that. That may be why he got elected. I don't know. The truth is, there are probably a lot of reasons why he got elected. He was a Democrat. He represented the democratic structure, which already had a lot of people who supported it. There were a lot of...
At the right time.
There are a lot of things that happened. There are a lot of things that may have happened that led to that kind of change. But if we look at it just on the most superficial level possible, essentially one of the changes that occurred was the very fact that he was black and running for president, and not vice president. President was a change. And then he was saying, let's change the way the structure has worked until now. Let's not elect another white man into office. Right? Is that the only thing he was saying? Absolutely not.
Hillary Clinton was saying the same thing.
Right? And if Hillary Clinton gets elected as president, what's going to happen? We could look at it the same way. She's a woman. Now, is that the only way you look at it? Absolutely not, because they do come with ideas. But some people simply ascribed to the idea of change from the sense of, this is something different. We've never had this before. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. right? And there were people, I will agree, there were some people who decided to vote the way they voted because of it. And there were some people who voted the way they voted in spite of it and despite of it, okay? Some people voted the opposite. Normally they would have voted for a Democrat and they said, you know, I don't want to have a black man in the, right? And yes, there were some people who said that. You know, and those people probably were socialized and raised from nothing to look at blacks differently. And therefore, for them, having a black man in office would have been, or is, the worst thing that could possibly happen. Is it the worst thing that could possibly happen? No. Is it the best thing that could possibly happen? No. Is it different? Yes. It's different. It's a change to the status quo that existed up until that point. And that's just on the most basic level. Think about it in depth. I mean, think about it in depth. Let's talk about Obamacare, for instance. Or let's talk about the EU and whether or not they want to, you know, expand or they want to shrink down. Or Britain's participation in the EU. And how Britain keeps threatening, I'm going to leave because we don't like what's going on there. We don't agree with it. Right? There's so many different layers and levels to the interaction of ideas and politics that to understand all of them is nearly impossible. So what do? We pick and choose. We create theories. And those theories try and teach us something about how people express their ideas and why those ideas are important. Okay? We talk about how people express ideas. We talk about what's the best way for politics to take place. Democratically, autocratically. What is the ideal polity? What is the ideal form of politics? Anyone? You would say democracy.
King.
You say king.
Whatever works best for the specific society.
Whatever works best for a specific society.
No government.
No government whatsoever. We have an anarchist here. Anyone else? Or a communist. I don't know what you are. Okay? No. Think about this for a second. There are people who spend their time doing what? Discussing what is the best form of politics. And they create theories about them. Anyone heard of Plato? What was Plato's best form of politics? Does anyone know? Oh, it wasn't a democracy. Even though what? Nope. Nope. Come on, guys.
He believed in one leader.
He believed in one leader. What was it called? Does anyone know what he was called? No. The beneficial tyrant. Right? What was he? What kind of tyrant was this? No, we're talking a tyrant. Absolute leader. But what was he? He was nice. I'm a nice leader. Why is he nice? It's called a philosophical tyrant. He's supposed to be a philosopher, right? The philosopher king. Who is this philosopher king? Someone who knows about politics, has spent their entire lives learning about politics, knows how to get people to take their ideas and manifest them in the world at large. Now, why would a philosophical king be the best possible thing out there? How much argument is there if you have a philosophical king? None. Why? Because if he's really a philosophical king and everyone accepts him as the king because he is the most knowledgeable in this field and he can get things done, and he does things that are to the benefit of the people, beneficial for them, who wants to argue with that? All you have to do is do what you're told. How nice would that be? All he says to you guys is, look, you guys, you're really smart. You know what you're doing? Okay, you guys go be doctors. And you guys, you know what you're doing, and you go do something else. What's the problem with the idea of a philosophical king?
It's not realistic.
It's not realistic. What else? What's wrong with any king or any kind of situation where we find that there's one leader? Is there really only one leader?
I think it's really hard to overthrow the leader.
It's hard to overthrow, but what is it about the one leader that's really a problem with him? When you say there's only one leader somewhere, what does that mean?
There's only one idea.
Is there really only one leader?
No.
Everyone wants to influence him, right? Everyone wants to change how he thinks. Now I'm going to go Purim on you guys for a minute. We're going to talk about Purim. Let's think about Purim, okay? You've got Achashverosh, right? Achashverosh is the epitome of the leader who wants to be led. Okay? He is the leader who wants to be led. Why? Okay, do you know the story of Purim? Oh, okay, this is good. We have someone here who's never heard the story of Purim. This is going to be fun. The story of Purim goes like this. For all of you who've never heard it, I've been saying it to my son for a while now. So, story of Purim in about 2 seconds flat. King has queen. Queen is very pretty. King says to queen, come and show yourself off to all of these people who are having a nice drink. Queen says, no. King says, okay, you're out of here. And then he turns to his princes and says, what to them? What do we as a state do in response to a queen who does not do the bidding of the king? Right? And what do the friends say? The princes say, no, they don't say off with her head. It's a nice try. They say, kick her out. Put her in some corner, take away her crown, find a new queen. And they do. He does. Okay, great. Does it. And then what happens? Time passes. He gets bored, wants a new queen. And they say, okay, find a queen. They search throughout the entire kingdom. You've heard this story before, I'm sure. They find a queen. The queen's name is Esther. Her real name is Hadassah, but she calls herself Esther. She's the one who gets chosen. Okay? And then what happens? The uncle of the king hears about a plot to kill him, to kill the king. No, the uncle of the queen. Sorry, the uncle of the queen, Mordechai, says, I heard of this plot to kill the king. Now he could do two things. What could he do? Do nothing. Or he can try and do something. Right? Now if he does something, is he taking a chance? Because what happens if they actually kill the king? What are they going to do to Mordechai? Take his head off as well. Luckily, doesn't happen. King gets saved, and everything's well and good for a little while. And then this really bad man comes along, and his name's Haman. Boo, right? What? And he is the advisor of the king. Okay, he's the advisor of the king. And this advisor doesn't like the Jews, specifically Mordechai, because Mordechai won't bow down to him, for whatever reasons. And so what does Haman say he's going to do? Don't boo again. What does Haman say he's going to do? Not just off with his head. I want to kill all the Jews. Esther's a Jew, right? I want to kill all the Jews. They don't know that. They want to kill all the Jews. And what happens? Esther has to go and talk to the king and figure it out. And instead of just going to the king and saying, look, he wants to kill me, she figures out that what she really has to do is convince the king that Haman doesn't have the king's best interest at heart. What's interesting about this story, and I'm going to end it there for a moment and then I'll finish it off. What's interesting about this story up till now? Two things. One, Mordechai has represented himself as an exemplary follower to the king. What has he done? He stepped up to the plate and took a chance over an idea, the continued reign of Ahasuerus, right? And he did it without anything motivating him to do it, besides potentially saving his queen's life. Potentially. Okay? That's the only thing that might have been an issue. But inherently, he took a huge chance. He did it as an exemplary follower. Okay? Now, fast forward to the new situation. Haman doesn't act as an exemplary follower. He acts as a me-man. Right? What does he essentially say? He says, I don't like the Jews. I want to kill them. But whose power does he use to do it? The king's power. Now think about this for a second. Haman represents something that happens every single day in politics. How many people actually speak to the President of the United States? 10, 20 people? 30? How many people speak to Bibi Netanyahu every day? 30? Not nearly as much as you think. 30, 40 people actually get more than a second of his time? When they walk out of his office, one of two things has happened. Either he has accepted their ideas and is now going to espouse them, or he hasn't. Now, when somebody says, I'm talking because Bibi sent me, who is he talking for? Bibi Netanyahu, right? When Haman speaks, who is he speaking for when he says kill the Jews? For the king, right? So it's not just enough to have a philosophical king. You also need to have philosophical advisors, right? Because if one of those advisors doesn't follow the exact way the philosophical king speaks of it, what's going to happen? He can take the system and manipulate it for his own ideas. Why? Because I speak for the king. And can the king really know everything that happens in his territory? No. Even in a little city, it's not possible, right? And herein lies the crux of the issue. What is the best form of politics? Who knows? Every form of politics has its pluses and minuses. That's why we create political theory. That's why we analyze politics. That's why we talk about ideas. That's why we talk about things like power and institutions. Because when we talk about it, we hope to change it for the better. We hope to maintain things that are working well and learn, normally on our own backs, how things are working poorly and what needs to change. And it's dynamic. Okay? We are going to take a break, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. We're going to come back, we have a practicum. See you all later. We are going to do a practicum. The practicum is going to be like many of our other practicum. You are going to have to get into small groups, talk, and then, come out of those groups and have discussion. The gentleman with the camera would like to choose one of the groups, put a microphone in the middle so he can hear the discussion that's taking place. After he's done with that, when we open up to the groups, he's going to come over here, and you guys will have your free-for-all where you guys beat up on each other verbally. I am going to remind you guys, you do not have the right to disparage anyone in this room. Whether you agree with their analysis, don't agree with their analysis, think that they're stupid, think that they're brilliant, you have to respect the people that are here, give them the chance to talk. If you disagree, that's fine. Do so politely and explain why. Okay? Great. The practicum goes as follows. You're going to divide into 4 groups. Okay? Each group is going to take one state. The states are all states that are presently or have recently been in turmoil. Okay? Venezuela, right? The Ukraine, Syria, and Egypt. Each of these states is presently facing predominantly internal struggle, where the structure is being questioned, agents of a new structure are trying to make change, and something is coming out of it. I want you to examine the following in depth. What are the core ideas of the state as it exists or existed in its original state, as silly as that sounds? Why are the core ideas being challenged? What about them are problematic? And what are the new ideas that are coming up? How are those core ideas being challenged? Are they being challenged legally, illegally? What steps are being taken? What are people doing to challenge it? Okay? And then I want you to prepare to compare your findings with the other groups. What do I mean? I want you to make it clear and logical while you're answering these questions, how you're answering them in a way that other groups can compare to your ideas and what you've seen. Now, I'm going to just divide you. How many do we have today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's 17, 18 of you. Okay, 18 divided by 4, 4 groups of 4 and 2 groups of 5. Okay, so we'll go 5 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You 3.
Oh, we're 5.
Oh, so Jasmine, 1, 2.
No, you can't. No,
Us?
Yeah, you're 5. With Jasmine is 5. Fine, you guys be 5 over there, and we'll do 4 and 4. You're going to be with the 3 ladies, and you're going to be with the 2 ladies and the gentleman. Okay? Good. All right, guys, make yourselves into groups, and then he'll put a microphone in the middle of one of you. If a group really doesn't want a microphone, then you can just say it, but I'd prefer if you guys don't argue. She doesn't want a microphone. Can we have a microphone? You can put it over here. You don't have to be a democracy. Choose whoever you want.
You're being an agent for Bar-Ilan.
Go for it, go for it.
He's being an agent for Bar-Ilan, so it has to be very good.
So what do you think about yesterday's
So do we have laptops?
Okay, Syria. Conflict in Syria.
So we want to have a broader picture, and I really don't know like general situation in Syria. I know just they had. No, I'm not gonna say this. There is a microphone.
Assad was in charge. He was pretty much a dictator.
He wasn't. It's a facade democracy.
Yeah, there is a facade. He
Which is, you could argue, a form of dictatorship. Okay, so from the beginning, it was also a reaction to the Arab revolutions in 2011. It spread. So it began at the same time as a number of other revolutions in the Arabic world, wanting democracy, wanting a more fair political system where people had more like equal share of the political agenda in the country.
Yes.
So that's like one.
It's like I think it's the second wave of the spring of the Arab Spring. I think that was like a second wave. I don't. Do you think it was one of the first countries? No, I think it was.
Remember?
No,
No, it was definitely one of the
Egypt.
second.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was Libya.
Tunisia,
Libya.
yeah.
In the beginning, it started as the crisis, and then it went to an uprising, and then they called it the Civil War.
Okay.
And there's like, I'm just looking at like a list of the people. I'll show you in a second. Most of the people fighting, like I can't name them all, but like this is the side for and against, and there's like 15 like armies fighting on both sides.
Sorry, what do you say?
Oh, so
So you can see there's a list of like people for and against, and there's like 30 different armies on each side.
Yeah. So one element is the general revolutions that happened. Another element is that inside of Syria there was like many different kinds of ethnic groups that did not feel they had equal political power.
Okay, and also I know the leader, though, as you say, is a facade democracy because the leader loves to portray himself as actually as being making people happy, and that's how he loves the media to portray himself. I think. That doesn't have too much
So
to
what
do
kind
with
of
politics.
ideas can you say were the core ideas of the state before the revolution? I have no clue.
Yeah, I don't know.
Did he have ideas?
Could we Google like Syria before and after the
The Assad
revolution?
government. Syria became an independent republic in 1946. Their democratic rule, though democratic rule was ended by a coup in March 1949, followed by 2 or more coups that year. So he took over in 1949, and there was a popular uprising against the military in 1954. And Bashar became president, and he married a British-born Sunni Muslim. The period was characterized as the emergence of numerous rules. So
Yeah, he studied in Harvard.
Political
Didn't he? No, he studied in
He's quite well educated and also like studied in the Western world.
Yeah.
Assad?
Yeah, he was.
I guess one of his core ideas was that he should remain power. I'm just guessing. One of his core ideas would be that he wants to hold on to his power and that it should go in his family. His father was the president before him. He doesn't really care about voting. But at least he has a tendency of winning with 99%. And he's a Alawi, right? So he
I think
thinks that
he's a very
he should have
conservative
a
person, but he's also open to new streams. For example, he's very respectful of Christians there, and it's one of the Arab countries that's very open to Christians. They respect them and give them a vote and other powers that in other countries they don't have. So I think he's a conservative person, but also really he wants to bring Syria with a good place in the future. I think he doesn't want to be
So there was this sense of openness before, like that was. Can we say that was one of the core ideas?
And that's why today Christians
compared
are,
to other
most of
maybe
Christians
to other
are for
countries, it was like there was this sense of openness.
I wouldn't know. I never heard about Syria before the revolution. That's when I started.
Yeah, because it became suddenly it was on the news because of the revolution.
we say in general terms, there was dictatorship. It's a minority ethnic group holding power, so he wants to contain that power in the hands of his small ethnic group slash family. That's maybe the main ideas of the state before the revolution, because that's exactly what the opposers wanted to change, this minority holding power.
Also, to be fair, one of their core values is hating Israel. No, like they say that publicly.
Yeah, sure. It's not. I don't have no clue about how
Yeah, but it's not
central
what
it is.
the
It might just
main.
be.
I don't think it's not.
It's not internally, but they have like an external.
Yeah, but I think it's good. It's secondary. It's secondary to the.
It's not necessarily their main value.
Syria does not exist.
But
in
it's
order
something.
to-
It's something that they use a lot. Meaning, when he was attacked, when the initial crisis broke out, there was a lot of discussion of, and there's been like things over the border with Israel that Assad was like provoking Israel to like gain support in his country. He was doing like little things by the border with Israel to provoke Israel's military, and then they would like have a common enemy.
I think it would be overestimating saying it was like a
No, I don't think it was.
core
I
idea
don't think
of the state.
it's not the. But
And
it
I
is
don't.
something
And
that-
also, it's not a core idea of the opposers, so maybe it's not relevant in this situation.
Yeah, I really
Should we move
don't
on to
think
the,
that would
the
be
number
added
two
to the core
thing,
idea.
saying about the ideas being challenged?
Ladies first.
I was first. Don't worry. It's your turn.
I think we should read something like we already said a lot, but we should read like find a source. I don't know.
It's also a
the
country
fact
that
book
is
too.
different because it fought against Iran, against Iraq. For example, the rebels today are supported by Iran. Weapons are given by Iran. So it's also very. It's
Yes,
interesting.
and that is mainly maybe because of the Sunni Shia division, right? Because Iran is part of
plays an
Shia
important role.
and wants to support a Shia rule or some kind of similar. Whereas some of the demonstrants are Sunnis, or I don't exactly know what the Kurds are. I think they're also kind of Sunni, aren't they? And they want independence. They want their own state, by the way. So lots of like different motives and different motivations to fight Assad. I read an interesting article saying it was also a result of post-colonialism, because these borders have been drawn on a map by French and British people like 50 years ago, and they didn't take into consideration the actual ethnic outlay of the region. So now they are trying to rebalance the power by making
Who
a civil
had the
war.
mandate in Syria?
It was France.
It was France.
They wanted it to be the Christian state. I'm pretty sure that when France left, many Christians were murdered terribly.
Yeah. Okay.
There is no separation of powers.
Also, in a lot of these countries where there were unrest, there's like the values they were fighting for, and then like they were protesting. For example, in Egypt also. And what really threw them over the top and pushed the protest more is that the government started using violence. So, for example, when Syria started using, it was one thing when they were protesting against the government, and then when they started using chemical weapons, for example, against civilians, so that like even people who wouldn't have been against the government made one of their core values: a government that shoots against civilians doesn't have the right to govern, which is why they attacked Libya by international forces, and it almost caused international intervention in Syria also.
Exactly. So they like the government also lost some of its legitimacy because of the actions that it made with escalating the conflict.
Pretty much lost when it used chemical weapons.
Yeah.
Ideas. Why the things how they really try to get something and the limits on
It's also very, it's a very young country, so you have to know it's like more than 60% of the population are youngsters, and they are really based on development research. And if you, I saw several documentaries about it, and you see youth partying at night, so it's on the beach. Some really with dressing really completely hidden, but going to the sea completely hidden, and some really completely almost naked. So it's very
So it might
diverse.
be also a youth rebellion saying we want more
It wasn't a
free.
rebellion. It was just natural for them.
Are you talking before?
So that's, I think that's surprising.
Other question.
It's a kind of it's an authoritarian regime, but it's not a democracy, but it has some characteristic of the Western democracy in it.
It seems as though the people who are the government is supported by more extreme organizations. Looking, you have like the Ba'ath Party in Syria. You have Iran is helping them, and Hezbollah, and all these terrorist organizations are supporting the government. Opposed to the opposition ones, which is, for example, Free Syrian Army, which at least seems like their goal is to free Syria. I mean, they could be run by terrorists also, but obviously don't know which one's better. But the ones supporting the government are the main powers that are supporting terrorist organizations throughout the world.
Okay, so that was another one.
I would like a moment of your time and energy. Just listen. Concentrate on me for just 1 second. Guys, I was asked a question about the how questions on the board. How are these core ideas being challenged? How is a function of energy and resources? What is it that people are willing to do? To what lengths are they willing to go? And what is it what are the limits on that? Are they just going to destroy everything, or are they trying to simply change the structure, or even change the way the structure runs? There's different aspects of it. There's different ways of looking at it. Look at how the people are doing it and what those limits are, not just what they're doing. Okay? Does that make sense? Does anyone have a question? Okay, back to work.
I feel so unuseful. Like, I think we should.
No, let's start with what did you hear from the media when it was more when it was in the newspapers all the time.
Well, a lot of civilians dying. A lot of civilians dying.
From who and why?
Well, there was. I would call it a civil war.
Yeah, sure.
So between the official regime and instead the protesters, and yeah, we can definitely say like how are those core ideas being challenged. I think that they want to express themselves so badly that they don't care if they're like they're going to sacrifice maybe a lot of civilians' lives in order to.
Especially the chemical attack would be saying to suffer not only your own lives or soldiers' lives, but also eventually civilians if they should be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So it means that they put their ideas as the main priority.
Well, they put it as the main priority, but they're not putting themselves in danger. Meaning they're willing to sacrifice other people's lives for them.
But they're not sacrificing.
Assad's not going in and putting himself on the line, but as far as he's concerned, anyone who's not him is worthless, and they're just people that contribute to his power. But
that's an interpretation too.
I mean, he's not, for example, he's not willing to he hasn't gotten out and fought himself. He's not willing to give up.
That's true.
It's much easier to give up lives.
Most state leaders don't go out to the front themselves in wars anymore. They did in the Middle East.
Yeah, but that's not specific of Syria. It's
I would argue that that's a very logical way to run an army is not to go as president out to the front line.
The point is, he's not sending soldiers either. He's sending missiles at civilians, and he's sending
that's right. So
bombs.
Assad has got.
He's not even willing to sacrifice his own soldiers necessarily.
Bigger weapon stuff. What has he got? Yeah, weapons. He's got a lot of weapons. The rebellion does not have so many weapons. They have a lot of guns. Where did they get the guns from? Did they get them from France?
From Hezbollah. No, from
that would be Assad. The other side.
They get from international groups. America, I know in Congress they talk about all the time.
I'm pretty sure that Europe decided to ship some weapons to
the opposition.
Yeah.
Also Kerry and what's his name and McCain always say how they're sending.
So America is openly supplying
supplies to the opposition.
And also we have to notice that in the opposition there are many doctors, lawyers, so people who are really high placed in the institutions before. So it's like a general anger against the power. I don't know where that comes from, what will lead to this, but it's really in depth, I think.
And
I mean, the people in the opposition are willing to give up everything.
the opposition are, yeah, exactly. They're pretty much open to, like, ready to give up
On
everything.
the one hand,
in
they're
their
willing to give
lives.
up everything. On the other hand, many of them don't have a choice once they get involved.
As soon as the war is at where it is right now, might be like self-protection.
Some people don't have a choice, and some people made the conscious decision to go give up their own. Some people tried to flee. Others
Many
decided
people,
that
yeah.
there wasn't a viable option. From the opposition's perspective, they that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's sum up. What are the core ideas of the state? What did we talk about?
We say that an authoritarian regime with.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not authoritarian, it's not totalitarian, it's not ideological.
But it's, at the same time, it has a facade democracy, so it's not openly authoritarian. Then we said.
Well, at this point it is. I mean, before the Civil War.
No, but we're talking about the core ideas.
Right.
The core ideas are the ones from before. Some elements. Should we mention that they have some elements of Western democracies? Somehow influenced. Like,
That's facade democracy.
okay.
Yeah.
That's all together. Okay.
And it's a minority holding the power and they want to continue having this power. That I think is a core idea. It might also be a religious struggle, as we talked about, between Shia and Sunni. And number 2, the core idea is being challenged.
Well, the fact that it's not actually a democracy is being challenged because
One idea, yeah.
they don't like that. And well, I think they're the same. They're the same ideas. The core ideas that we listed before are the same ideas that are being challenged, right?
Yeah, or just, like,
I don't know. It's,
the like democracy and the Arab Spring in general, the fact that there were different ethnic groups completely outside of political power.
oh, sorry, I didn't read that. Yeah, sorry. I read something else. Sorry. So why? Yeah.
Because of this.
The pressure, the international pressure from the Arab Spring, they wanted to be a part of it because it's, since, as I said before, it's a wave. You want to be with the wave when the wave
you
is
jump
coming.
on it when there seems to be support.
Yeah,
The ideas were maybe they were
in a
already
moment
existing.
where all the
Yeah.
neighbor countries are experiencing something somewhat similar, you are going to do it in that moment and not waiting. Or
Yeah, it seemed like it was the shot that people might have.
So Arab Spring.
And the demography saying that there are lots of different ethnic groups in an area created by, like a country created, a state created by colonial powers
Yeah. So variety of ethnic groups.
and religious differences. Also, the majority of the Syria groups, even though they're different ones of them, are Sunni, while the political power was Shia. That's also
Yes, I got confirmation.
part of the conflict.
Should I write it?
I would.
Yeah.
If you
Can you
describe
say it
the
better?
majority of the population in Syria are Sunni, whereas the Alawi is a branch of Shia of some sort. I don't know this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how are these core ideas being challenged? Through a violent and like a civil war, violent protests,
By any means necessary.
and by any means, also by sacrificing a lot of civilians' lives.
Sacrificing lives. Well, it's really the truth is it should be any means necessary without provoking foreign intervention. Because they stopped using chemical weapons when there was a threat of American invasion.
That's true. So that was like a limit to Assad's power right there.
Can you
Fear
read
of
that?
intervention.
They're willing to use any means necessary without provoking a military intervention from another country. Although the other countries are supplying weapons, they don't have.
No, they're not. They're not.
There are other countries supplying weapons to the opposition, but they're not actually using their own air force, for example. America, that's what I'm saying, America threatened to use their air force against Syria unless they stop using chemical weapons.
They threatened many times that, like America, I don't know, many countries threatened many times to intervene. You said that intervene?
It wasn't
What
that
happened was Syria kept using certain chemical weapons on a small scale, and then one day it was they had footage and proof that Syria had killed hundreds of people with one chemical weapon. So Obama basically said we're going to respond, and he was gonna bomb Syria. Congress was on break, and he said when Congress gets back, we're going to ask for authorization. We're going to ask for authorization to use force. And in that time, Russia managed to make a deal because Syria was under the pressure of American invasion, or not invasion, but bombing, whatever you want to call it. So then Syria said, okay, we won't use chemical weapons anymore. We'll send them all out of the country. And we'll use any means, any other normal means, and we won't use chemical weapons anymore if it'll stop foreign intervention, foreign military intervention.
And somehow, like, I don't know, the mainstream humanitarian associations didn't give as much importance to the situation.
There are two things in it. There's the humanitarian problem, which is that people are getting killed in hundreds of thousands, and the rest are fleeing. But that is actually it's to a certain degree legal in international law. It's legal to have a war unless you make war crimes, which is, for instance, using illegal weapons of mass destruction. So that's one of the reasons that the international society needed to act, to be saying there's a law.
Yeah, what I feel like they didn't raise as much awareness to the general population as much as it was necessary to.
It's also necessary to say that you guys have been in Israel, and I've also been in Israel, but I was reading Danish news, and it was much more prominent in Danish news than it was here in Israel.
In Italy,
I also, at the time, I was in America with.
I don't think Israel is that might be the reason for you guys not being.
No, I don't know. Like, I read all the time Italian newspapers, so it was covered with just the facts. Like this happened, but not with like the pathos that you would put in like this is something terrible that is going on, and maybe in Denmark.
Well, that's how they were reporting it when they used chemical weapons. It was all over the television. They were showing videos for hours in America.
Pictures,
videos, and
then once they said
was not covered. It was not at all
but
the
Israel
same.
Was
no, I don't know. I wasn't sure when they were using.
I was just double checking, and it was not the same. It was not the same amount of until the chemical weapons situation, because then it affected Israel because Israel was afraid.
Israel was taking a lot of civilians.
Israel does not have the same amount of foreign stuff as the Danish newspapers. I think it's simply because we have nothing to write about inside of Denmark, so we write about the world.
Okay, no, but in general, when Israel talked about it, it was, for example, to talk about like the civilians that they took inside of Israel to like in hospitals, like rescuing them, and there were some cases.
Well, Israel also. You have to remember, views Syria as an enemy country. So I'm not saying they think it's a good thing, but Israeli politicians are not running to find a resolution. They're just happy that they're not attacking us.
Yeah, they say as long as
meaning
their own problem.
They just stopped gas mass distribution because they got rid of the chemical weapons, and so they're not going to be rushing to stop a human rights thing when both sides are potential very strong enemies of the country itself.
Also, Israel has already its own situation, and you don't want to add new.
Right. And Syria is part of that situation. Syria has always been an enemy of Israel. Both sides are an enemy of Israel, so therefore they're not going to want to go push for a resolution.
But it's interesting right now how that changes when there is a civil war, also because it's the state of Syria that is an enemy, but if that state is being challenged from within, it's a question.
The question is who's challenging. That's what I said before.
It still is an enemy.
That's why many times, not as much now, but there were many provocations, presumably because Assad wanted to get the support of the belligerents, or the opposition. He wanted to get support of the opposition, so therefore he was causing little provocations by the Israeli border. because of him showing
It's
showing that
like
Israel's
a
not the
unifying
aggressor.
thing. Like at least even
Right,
if
that's what I'm
they're-
saying. Because
definitely.
one of the reasons he did that was to get the opposition on his side.
Yeah. Do any of you know how many refugees, Syrian refugees that Israel took? If any?
I don't think they took so many refugees, but I think they helped people.
Not many, but like there were a lot of coverage because afterwards there was the problem about they didn't want to go back. Like that's.
No, those aren't refugees from Syria.
Like right now, there's nothing to go back to. Now there's still a civil war. You can't ask people to go back before the civil war
I
is
don't
over.
think Israel really takes. I'll look up and see if I can find the numbers, but I don't think they really
I wanted
take.
to look that up. It's
I don't think they
interesting.
really take refugees. They take people who are injured by the border and help them, but they don't take people just running.
I wouldn't say
I think
so.
they go to other countries.
Yeah, I don't think they go and rescue them inside of Syria. I really.
No,
No,
but
meaning
when
other
they
countries.
flee, when they flee,
Other
Yeah.
countries,
Which they do.
if they flee to
Which
other
they try
countries,
to
I
do.
think other countries accept them.
I don't know. I read like I don't know the numbers.
It's a big question in Denmark. We're like talking how many refugees can we absorb from Syria and stuff like that. But it's of course because of the political situation, it's different here. It's because of there's technically a war. But these people who flee are not.
I know, especially
part of that war.
like they on the news covered mostly people that were injured, like that were brought to hospitals. I don't know about the people who are not injured. How this works to just flee, like you said. I have no idea.
Probably don't get it.
I'm looking at the numbers for Syrian refugees. It says in Lebanon there's like 100,000, Jordan, Turkey, Iraq, Egypt, Algeria, Sweden, Germany. But I don't think it doesn't say anything for Israel.
It's very.
They don't really
recent,
accept.
so-
They don't really accept refugees. They
From a country that you're
help
officially in
people who
war.
are injured
Yeah.
and who need their hospital. Okay. They don't give people really refuge.
So it's only about the hospital. It's really not about the.
I think it says even America is less than 100, but they're on the list. France, Russia, Egypt took in like 140,000. Iraq took 217,000. Turkey took 600,000, 700,000.
600,000 in Turkey.
Turkey government estimate is 700,000. Lebanon took, according to Lebanese government, 1 million, which is crazy. Jordan took 600,000. Turkey took 700,000. And the other ones are all small, just like 200,000.
Do you think now we're moving a little bit away from the discussion? Do you think that is right?
What?
Do you think Israel should have taken more refugees, considering the situation?
I don't know.
I think it's better for them and Israel if they go to the other countries. If they didn't have anywhere else to go, I would.
Without speaking of, if you don't consider like leave for a second like the whole situation, I just think it's like any state should feel a little bit the
But
how do you say
there's
the
a situation.
yeah, I know I cannot pretend there is not, but
That would be imagining.
I don't think they should take Syrian refugees.
4 minutes. I think so. Why?
I think it's a terrible situation.
I
First
think
of all,
it's
there are
like
other countries that they're going to. And second of
international
all, because
responsibility. Like that's what,
they're-
Exactly. And other countries in the area have been taking that
the
responsibility.
country is
Exactly.
an enemy of
Israel.
is an enemy of the state. It's not just the government. They're one of the great. If they wanted to make peace with us, like Jordan and Egypt, so fine. But that's not the case. They still want to provoke war.
The people who are fleeing right now have been either victims of or directly in opposition of the state of Syria, which was an enemy of Israel. So how can they be considered enemies?
They weren't in direct opposition to that aspect.
I say.
but how do you
Syria's been
how
under
can you
different
compare
governments.
how,
Syria
You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. Now we're talking individuals.
how can you compare a refugee that goes into another state into a state with which he's in war with, like his state is in war with? Like I don't know. You would have to see also the dynamics. How would that work of the refugee coming into Israel?
Lebanon took in 1 million refugees. Okay, if we open the border and allow 1 million Syrian refugees into Israel, the country wouldn't exist anymore.
So it's a Zionist idea. It's a Zionist problem, really.
It's also a Zionist idea, but even if it wasn't, if you look at Lebanon, what happened in Lebanon several times, forget about Zionism. I happen to think for those reasons as well, but Lebanon was destroyed because they opened up the borders and it was a free country and everyone did what they want, and then the country just imploded on itself and now it's run by a terrorist organization. But
Yeah, to make some about
regardless of
Zionism
if
in
you
general,
open your
it's like
borders
about
and you
your
create chaos,
the order
even if
of
you're
your
trying
own
to do something
state.
good.
Like
I'm not saying you should take 1 million refugees. I'm just saying that if
so,
even
would
from
you put
a
a
point of
number
view-
like you saying we're taking this
No, I
number?
prefer not to.
But like,
I'm saying as a principle, if a wealthy state,
Principle, I think
like
they can
Israel,
help injured people.
yeah, but
I don't think turning
realistically
Israel
speaking, I understand also the point that you say, okay, I want to help you, but at the same time, I don't want you to bring crisis into like the crisis, like the disorders also into my country.
but maybe
because
Turkey would feel the same way. I mean,
I'm saying this is not a problem only of Israel. It's like it's a question that would be raised everywhere.
All right, guys, let's guys, let's call it there. Okay, starting to get mead. We'll then go through it and discuss how they're similar, how they're different, and move on from there. Syria, you're up first. What core ideas did Syria represent prior to the establishment, prior to the challenges that were made?
Who wants to talk?
Someone, anybody, choose.
please,
Here it is.
So, the core ideas of Syria were, before the whole crisis started, were of an authoritarian regime, but which was kind of hidden by a facade democracy that has a lot of balance, because Syria still had some elements of Western democracies, like in order to make it, let's say it. And one of the core ideas is a minority holding all the power, and what were the other core ideas?
Different streams, religious streams.
Just say.
Was there religious freedom?
Yeah, there is.
There was.
There is. Oh, yeah,
Was.
now.
Was. Okay.
No, there's not.
Ukraine. What were the core ideas? I'm going to choose one of you if you don't talk. Somebody talk.
One was to limit the powers of the president and give more power to the parliament.
Core ideas of the state before challenges were made. This was a core idea of the state before anyone challenged anything. What was the core idea previously? That's my question. Alright, I'm going to come back to you, okay? Venezuela, what were the core ideas?
They're a very socialist country.
Socialism. What else?
They also valued like human rights and healthcare was very important to them.
Okay, human rights, healthcare were important things to them. Okay. And Egypt, right?
Yeah, so basically that they were running into a democracy, they were transitional democracy, but
Wait a minute. Go back a little bit. What were they first?
first,
What were they under Mubarak?
like just like religious, like
Under Mubarak.
Mubarak was an autocracy,
It was an autocracy.
so non-democratic.
It was a non-democratic system. Okay. So one of its core ideas was that. That was
Yeah,
what
core
else?
ideas was religion mainly. Which
Okay.
is
What was about it? What about religion?
how strict to hold of Islamic law and stuff like that. Which,
All right. So that's one of the challenges that got made, right?
yeah, now it is.
All right. What was one of the things prior to it? Was religion a significant part of Egyptian life prior to the democratic revolution?
They didn't.
Double check.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they were fine with like a multiple.
Back to you guys. What were some of the core ideas?
Maintain a good relationship with Russia.
Maintaining good relations with Russia. What else? One of their most important ideas. Absolutely. What else?
Actually, it was like the normal country, but like the president had so much.
Was it democratically elected? He was democratically elected. Was it a facade democracy or a real democracy? Liberal democracy or more democratic than facade? Transitional.
More democratic.
I'm
not
saying
transition. It's like he was everything.
But he was everything. What does that mean? He was everything. Where did the power sit? With the president?
And with Putin from.
With the president. How was it under Mubarak? Where did the power sit? With Mubarak. How was it in Syria? Where did the power sit? With Assad. Venezuela. Where did the power sit?
It's a good question.
And the answer is
There wasn't really like a organized situation or organized institution with regard to how power was divided. It really stemmed from the top down, and the top really had like the majority of everything.
Yeah, but,
The president
in-
had everything.
In 1999, when they created a new constitution, they didn't just have the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branches, but they also had they also created other branches which helped get civilians more involved with the government.
So it was an issue of trying to get more people involved, more developmental.
It would appear to just be more of like a situation.
Okay, say it again. All right. So why are these core ideas being challenged? Why are the core ideas being challenged in Syria?
Well, there there were many different pressures. I will start listing them. First of all, the Arab Spring influence. The Arab Spring was this wave of them trying to democratization, and of course, Syria. Some people in Syria thought that was a good moment.
Okay.
Then the presence of a variety of ethnic groups and different religions.
Okay.
Was that? And also, we say that the majority of the population their religion was Sunni Islam, and was like
Yeah, they're Alawi. The government, Assad's government was Alawi, which is a branch of Shia.
Right.
Okay, so there was this contradiction.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So the main reason was that the president didn't sign a contract with the union.
Why is that important? You just said one of the core ideas of Ukraine. The Ukraine was to be close to Russia.
A lot of people in Ukraine wanted to get into the Union.
Why?
So there's economic crisis in Ukraine.
Why?
I think by joining the EU, it would create closer political ties with other countries and improve economic.
Okay, so basically they chose, after the Cold War, they chose not to join the European side. They stayed with the Russian side, and as a result, what happened? They reached a point of economic crisis. And now you're saying that the decision of the president led to some sort of conflict, and that decision was not to sign with the EU and to sign with Russia. Okay, Egypt.
The critical problems right now are the fact that it was a transitional democracy, but the protests sprang right at the beginning. And they were having turmoil right at the beginning. Also, economic reformation wasn't being done correctly. And I believe that the Islamic Brotherhood has a stricter view of the Islamic law, which is not as comforting to the people of Egypt who are used to it.
So essentially what happened in Egypt, just to take it back again to Mubarak for a second. Mubarak was not religious. It was a non-religious system, not democratic system. The people said we want a democratic system, and then what happened? Who they elect?
A guy who was more religious.
More religious. A religious system, right, which included the application of religious law in the country. And then who didn't like it?
All the people.
All the people?
No, not all the people.
Who specifically didn't like it?
The non-brotherhood people.
All right, and who else?
Aren't there Christians?
America.
How about the military?
Military, yes.
Okay. All right, Venezuela. Why are the core ideas being challenged?
The big problem is the economic reason.
Okay.
There's high inflation, low currency, strict currency control, and
What are the
also
people
the corruption
demanding?
of the government.
What are they demanding? What are the people demanding?
A total change in government system.
A change in the system?
Right, yeah. No, change in the system, in the economic structure of the system.
Just the economic structure?
Well, there's other issues too. Crime is a huge
it's also
problem
the military
too.
structure, because the military is starting to get more involved with the civilians, and they don't like that because they're having much harsher responses, especially when the civilians try to protest the government.
Yeah? Okay. All right. How are the ideas being challenged? Let's start over here. Ukraine. How are people challenging the ideas that are taking place?
Riots and demonstrations.
Riots and demonstrations. Egypt. How do
All
they
out
challenge?
protests.
All out protests.
Riots and demonstrations.
Demonstrations. How are they challenging it there?
By the protester side, any means necessary.
Any means
By
necessary.
the government side,
Very
any means
violent.
necessary that will avoid
Very violent.
international.
Okay. So what I want you guys to
What was the
get.
point? What was the point more?
Oh, sorry. Go
No, I
ahead.
said from the government side, it was any means necessary that will avoid international intervention.
Right. Exactly. How many of these states want, say, the United States or Russia to get involved in them? Not really, right? Why not?
Ukraine wants.
Ukraine wants.
Russia.
Yeah, well,
They
Ukraine
want
sort
help from the
of,
citizens,
but only sort of.
Because
You
it's
could-
ruled by Russia.
Right, and that's why. Okay.
Venezuela wants no one to get involved.
Nobody to get involved. Syria, especially Assad, doesn't want anyone to get involved. How about the opposition?
They do want the
They would be perfectly
international
happy with the international community.
community.
The question is how involved,
Yeah,
right? And Egypt,
Egypt has one.
does he want anyone involved? I don't think so, right?
Last time we did.
Okay, so let's think about this for a second. We have 4 different situations in 4 very unique situations. The Ukraine has an economic crisis. That economic crisis stems from essentially the Cold War, socialism. Let's take Venezuela. Guess what? Socialist country. Same basic problems. The thing is that Venezuela's crisis is based in a present socialist system, not in a past socialist system, right? A previously socialist system.
Chavez was not so good. I mean, Chavez was Chavez, but like they actually liked him a lot more
Right.
than the current president.
Right, exactly. And then you've got Syria. It's not so much an issue of money, economics, but what is it? values, core values, democracy, ideology, religion, right? Russia is the same, Egypt is the same thing. So we see here two different spheres that are having such a huge impact. Here we're talking about the economic sphere, significantly impacting what's going on in the politics of the country, right? Structures of the economic structure is what is essentially leading people to what? To seek change in government. And here, what are we seeing? It's not so much economic, it's also economic, but it's about democracy. It's about what? It's about freedom of religion, or the ability to create a religious state, even almost theocratic state, right? Think about how different those are, and yet how the same. The end result is still the same, isn't it? Riots, conflicts, internal pressures, people dying, and the end result, we don't know. In some places, we had what was essentially one revolt that got followed by another right afterwards, right? In Egypt and in Syria, we have a revolt that's taking place from 12 different angles, because maybe more, because there's so many different unique groups inside of it that each want their own thing. And they didn't even talk about the Kurds, which they have their own issues in Egypt, in Syria, and Turkey. Yeah. Okay. Then you got Venezuela. Who's leading the protests in Venezuela?
The people, the students.
The students. It's inherently the students who are leading it. Think about that. And in Ukraine, it's everybody. It's anyone who wanted what? To be part of Europe as opposed to part of Russia. Think about how interesting it is. You can take each of these states, examine them in depth, look at what their core ideas were, how those core ideas are being challenged, what those challenges represent, and when you get down to it, if you were to do a comparative analysis between the states, while the issues may be unique to each one of them, there is something about it which is very similar. There are things that these countries have in common that you will find in almost every country. Economic conflicts, political conflicts, religious conflicts, ideological conflicts. The question is, how are those conflicts being expressed? How are the ideas being expressed? Is it violent, which is what we're seeing in these states? Or is it through dialogue and through peaceful means, which is something we see in the United States very often, and in Italy very often, and in Denmark quite often, where you have that kind of dialogue. Here in Israel, we're going through a process of both dialogue, and now we're seeing even some violence take place. Who's being violent? Who's turning to violence? Here in Israel, who's turning to violence? Why?
What violence?
Rioting, throwing stuff, burning.
There was no throwing anything.
I saw them burn trash cans.
I saw many people throw trash cans. There were hundreds of thousands of people here, and the police reported there was not one incident.
How many been violent?
500,000 people, they said there was not one incident.
There are reports.
There was a stabbing in Bnei Brak last night by an Arab.
Thank you.
They're damn violent.
Some violence. Okay, all I'm saying is.
Of course there was.
The police said there was no violence yesterday. There was 500.
Yeah, I discussed them. Why do you want to discuss
Now you
this?
trust the police.
I don't think
Okay,
that was
guys, my point is still the same. My point is still the same. Even here in I'd like to finish. My point is still the same. Even here in Israel, where we don't have severe violence, rioting, people blowing things up or killing other people, more or less, over our internal core ideas, and we do still have core ideas that are being challenged regularly. The Haredim, what are they fighting for? To maintain the status quo. They don't want it to change. So essentially their rioting is not against the government in the sense of I want change. What is it? Don't change anything. Right? That's what they want. So there is something to it. How violent they get, that's already a question we're going to see. We don't know. It depends on how much they believe they have the power to act and what limits they're willing to put on their actions. Okay? That is something we are going to discuss more next week. I would like you all to make sure you do some reading on the newspapers about what's going on regarding the issue of Haredi youth and their induction into the military for next week. See you all later.